There are moments in life when we think we have everything figured out. We trust our partners, we believe in the bond we share, and we never expect that trust to be broken. But sometimes reality has a way of shattering those beliefs in the most unexpected and painful ways. One Reddit user who wished to remain anonymous shared a heart-wrenching story about infidelity that left them questioning everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and betrayal. It all began innocently enough, or so it seemed. They were in a committed relationship, enjoying the comfort of daily routines and shared memories. But something had changed. Something subtle, almost imperceptible. At first, the signs were small: a change in tone, a few late nights at work, a sudden distance that seemed to grow between them. The protagonist of our story had been together with their partner for years. They shared dreams, struggles, laughter, and even moments of silence. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, but sometimes perfection can be a mask, hiding the cracks underneath. It wasn't until a strange feeling crept in, a nagging suspicion, a gut instinct that told them something wasn't quite right, that things began to unravel. They started noticing strange behaviors, texts being deleted, phone calls taken in private, and a certain unease whenever they tried to bring up the future. There were subtle signs that something had changed, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. What they didn't know was that their partner was hiding a secret so big, it would alter the course of their life forever. The day it all came crashing down was like any other, or so it seemed. Their partner had been acting distant for weeks, but they just chalked it up to stress. The evening had started normally, with nothing out of the ordinary. But as they walked through the front door, something felt different. They couldn't explain it, just an odd energy in the air. It wasn't until they picked up their partner's phone just to check the time that the truth hit them like a ton of bricks. The messages were there, plain as day. Words exchanged with someone else. And not just casual exchanges, they were intimate, charged with emotions and promises. The pain, the betrayal, hit them harder than any physical blow. They didn't even need to scroll further to know everything they needed to know. The flood of emotions that followed was overwhelming. At first, there was disbelief. Could this really be happening? The person they had shared their life with, the one they trusted completely, had been leading a double life. The reality of it all was almost too much to bear. They confronted their partner, heart racing, mind whirling with 1,000 thoughts. The words came out in a rush, barely able to form coherent sentences. "What is this?" they demanded, holding up the phone, the evidence of betrayal sitting starkly in their hand. The silence that followed was deafening. Their partner didn't deny it at first. Instead, they looked away, almost as if they were ashamed of the truth they couldn't hide any longer. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, came the confession. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, a fleeting lapse in judgment. No, this had been going on for months, maybe longer. Their partner had been seeing someone else, someone who, at first, had seemed like just a friend, but slowly, over time, had turned into something more. The words cut deeper than the most vicious of knives. They explained that it had started as a way to escape the monotony of their life, a temporary thrill to fill a void they couldn't articulate. But somewhere along the way, it had turned into a full-blown affair. The emotional devastation was unimaginable. The person they had loved and built a life with had, in a moment of weakness, chosen to turn away from that shared life and instead created one with someone else, one filled with lies, secrets, and deceit. The trust they had built was shattered, broken beyond repair. But there was more to it than just a betrayal. There was the shame, the humiliation, the constant questioning of one's self-worth. How had they missed the signs? Why hadn't they noticed the subtle shifts in behavior? The feelings of inadequacy crept in, making them wonder if they weren't enough, if they had somehow failed in their role as a partner. As the tears fell and the anger rose, the questions began to pile up. Was there any hope for recovery? Could they ever look at their partner the same way again? Or had the damage been done irreparably? The relationship they once believed to be unbreakable had now been reduced to rubble, leaving them standing in the middle of the destruction with no clear way forward. The aftermath of the confession was a whirlwind of emotions. For days, they went through an endless cycle of disbelief, anger, and sadness. Every room in their home, once filled with memories, now felt cold and foreign. The person who had once been their partner, their confidant, their everything, now felt like a stranger. They couldn't escape the images of the messages, the promises, the lies. It was like a haunting presence that lingered in the back of their mind, refusing to let them find peace. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the situation began to sink in. Every conversation with their partner felt like a performance, an awkward attempt to make things normal again. But how could it ever be normal after something like this? How could they look into their partner's eyes and see anything but the betrayal that was so deeply etched into their heart? They tried to move forward, tried to salvage what little was left of their relationship. Therapy was suggested, couples counseling, the last-ditch effort to restore trust and repair the damage. But how do you fix something that feels so broken? How do you rebuild trust when it has been stomped on, trampled, and burned to ashes? It became clear that the hardest part wasn't the confrontation or even the anger. No, the hardest part was letting go of the life they had envisioned. The future they had built together seemed like a distant dream, slipping further away as time went on. And with each passing day, the weight of what had happened settled deeper into their soul. There were moments of clarity when they realized they needed to move on, to let go of the toxic relationship and take back control of their life. But even those moments were tinged with grief. After all, they had loved this person with everything they had. The idea of walking away, of starting over, felt like losing a part of themselves. In those quiet moments of reflection, they began to question everything about love and loyalty. They wondered if they would ever be able to trust someone again. Would they ever be able to open their heart to someone else without the fear of betrayal looming over them? Or had this experience changed their view of relationships forever? But amidst all the hurt and confusion, one thing became clear. They deserved better. They deserved someone who would cherish and respect them, someone who would never betray their trust. And though the road to healing would be long and difficult, they knew that eventually they would find peace. In the end, the experience left them scarred, but also stronger. It taught them that even the deepest wounds can heal with time, and that sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. And though they would never forget the pain of betrayal, they now knew the importance of trusting themselves above all else. As the days turned into months, the process of healing slowly began. It wasn't easy. There were nights filled with tears, moments of intense loneliness, and times when they would replay every detail in their mind, wondering what went wrong. But with each passing day, they learned to let go of the anger. The fury that once consumed them slowly started to dissipate, replaced by a quiet understanding that some things were beyond their control. In the midst of the pain, they found a new sense of strength. They started focusing on themselves, rediscovering who they were outside of the relationship. They picked up old hobbies, things they had neglected while they had been so deeply invested in their partner. Slowly, they rebuilt their life, one small step at a time. And with every step, the pain became a little more bearable, but the scars remained. The trust issues, the doubts, the lingering fear of being hurt again, they didn't just disappear overnight. They had learned the hard way that love wasn't always as perfect as it seemed. But they also learned that they had the power to choose their own path, to decide who they allowed into their life moving forward. It wasn't just about finding someone new, it was about finding peace within themselves first. They learned that healing wasn't linear, that it wasn't about getting over the betrayal, but rather learning to live with it, to carry the lessons it taught them. They realized that sometimes the biggest betrayal wasn't the one committed by someone else, it was the betrayal of their own self-worth, of neglecting their own needs and desires for the sake of someone else. In time, they found closure, not in the form of apologies or reconciliation, but in the quiet acceptance of the situation. They no longer looked for validation from their ex, no longer sought the answers that could never be given. They had come to understand that the answers they were looking for were already within them. The lesson was clear. They deserved love that was true, honest, and without betrayal. And so, as the years passed, they learned to trust again, not just in others, but in themselves. They understood that their worth was not defined by someone else's actions, but by their own strength, resilience, and capacity to love without fear. The experience, painful as it had been, had shaped them into a person who knew their value. They had walked through the fire and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to live a life that was true to themselves. They understood now that love wasn't about perfection, but about trust, respect, and mutual care. And though they would never forget the betrayal, they had finally forgiven not for their partner's sake, but for their own. They had learned to move forward, to let go, and to embrace the future with hope and a heart open to new possibilities. Years passed since the betrayal, and though the scars had faded, the lessons it taught remained with them. They had healed, but the journey had transformed them in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The broken pieces of their heart had slowly come together, not perfectly, but in a way that was uniquely their own. They had found peace not by forgetting, but by accepting. Life had a way of testing their newfound strength. They met someone new, a person who was kind, patient, and genuine. At first, there was hesitation. The fear of history repeating itself haunted them. Could they truly trust again? Could they open their heart without the constant fear of betrayal? The walls they had built were strong, protective, but isolating. But this person was different. They didn't rush. They didn't demand trust. Instead, they allowed it to unfold naturally, at a pace that felt comfortable. And slowly, the protagonists started to let their guard down, bit by bit. With each thoughtful gesture, with each kind word, the walls began to crumble, though cautiously and carefully. But even as the fear lessened, there were moments of doubt. It was easy to be scared, to assume that everyone might hurt you in the same way. But they had learned that love wasn't just about being afraid of loss, it was about taking the risk, letting go of past wounds, and learning to trust again, even when it felt impossible. They had come to understand that while the past could shape them, it would not define their future. One evening, sitting together, their new partner turned to them and said something that hit deeply. "I know you've been hurt, and I know you're afraid, but I'm here, not to fix you, but to be here with you, to build something real slowly, together." It was a simple statement, yet it felt like a balm to their soul. For the first time in a long while, they truly believed it. The pain had not vanished, but it no longer controlled them. It was a part of them. Yes, but it was no longer the defining factor. They were not just a survivor of betrayal. They were someone who had learned, grown, and was now ready to give love again. The journey of healing was not one with a clear endpoint. It was ongoing, always evolving, and they had accepted that. And for the first time in a long time, they realized that it wasn't the betrayal that would define them, but the courage it took to rise above it.